Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of LLF Online hosted by the Lahore Literary Festival. My name is Iman, and I'm delighted to introduce to you our esteemed guest speaker. We have Mr. Musharraf Ali Faruqi with us today. You may know him as an author, interpreter, or a translator. His books include Between Clay and Dust, among others, and his translated works include the 1871 Dastan Mir Hamza. He has also translated the first book of a 24-volume series, Hashruba, which is the world's first magical fantasy epic. He has also been shortlisted for several literary prizes, including the very prestigious DSC Prize for South Asian Literature and the Man Asian Literary Prize. His latest work, The Merman and the Book of Power, which will be the central point of our discussion, which is the central point of our discussion today. Now, I do want to say that after reading The Merman and the Book of Power, Musharraf has transcended from being a brilliant interpreter and translator of these epic dastans and kissas into being a progenitor of one. Welcome, Musharraf, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Iman. Thank you for having me.
How are you feeling today?
Uh, it's a bit cooler outside, so it's good. Less
Yeah,
humid. All is
weather's
well.
clearing up a little bit. Let's dive straight into the conversation. I do want to commence by commenting on how you begin or set the scene rather in the 13th century, which is an extraordinary moment in history, inhabited by caliphs, Abbasids, the Crusaders. And I couldn't help but notice the rich tapestry of West Asia, especially the advanced knowledge systems. So my question is, why do you set the scene or retell stories from this point in history?
Um, a lot of uh, lot of friends often ask me why I gravitate more towards the past than the present. Although I've written stories which are based in the present, or were based in the present at that time, some time ago. And my answer is that the present does not interest me too much. Um, we don't really have a handle on the present uh, in a literary sort of manner, and past is always of great interest to me. And this and our classical literary genre, both from oral and written literature, which is the qissa and the dastan. I work on them as a translator, and I am interested in exploring their structure, their poetics. So that is what interests me about these old classics and that the world which they explore. And the time that I based this story in was a particular time. It could not be any other time because the central character of this book, there are two central characters. One is the merman, and one is the person who's trying to understand the phenomenon of the merman. Uh, the scientist Khazvini, and he was active at the time of the last Abbasid Caliph and was a part of the Halaku Khan administration, which was installed after the conquest of Baghdad and the decimation of the Abbasid Caliphate. And it also explores the conflict, the seeming conflict, what seems to be a conflict of interest between a scholar who's at one point devoted to the caliph, and immediately after a few days, he's back in the bureaucracy of Hulagu Khan. So, how does that person reconcile himself to these shifts, and how did he view the world and his role in the world? Because these people had a lot of character. They were devoted to the literature that they studied and they explored, and they were not like uh, what you see in. They were not power players. They were not politicians. They were not. Although they did have political responsibilities, but they were not switching their roles to suit their ambitions. they were thinking about things and exploring how they. So that was how this Abbasid Caliphate and this time came about, because Ajaibul Makhluqa, the book which he is writing, Qazvini, uh, he's trying to find a way he could explain the phenomenon of the merman for his book and for his cosmography.
So I also couldn't help but notice that Kazvini is is collecting material and researching for his magnum opus. And it kind of reminded me of you because in other interviews and in newspapers and all, you said that it took you 5 years to research for this particular novella, I would say, because it's under 40,000 words. Um,
Yes.
so, do you think that there's some sort of link, or do you think it's pure coincidence?
Um, the a lot of the material which I studied for this book, I already had,
Hmm.
but then I came upon the conquest of Amorium, and that changed the story, because the story was essentially about. There were a lot of things about the merman, but it was not linked to the curse that had been carried down from the conquest of Amorium and the Book of Power that was discovered there. So all these, whatever is written in this book, whatever is described in this book, is more or less um historic, more or less a historic fact. Some details have been changed, which I've explained in my preface. That maybe some events have been moved around, but some identities, yes. But uh, a lot of these things actually happen, which makes it so fascinating, and which makes it. I was connecting things. Trying to find a reasonable explanation for them to connect, and that that took the greater part of the work.
Since you researched so much on this particular genre and looked into past histories and past stories, um, what was where was what's the origin of the mermaid? Because when you go to Copenhagen, you see a mermaid statue, and then there's talk of mermaids in West Asian cultures and folklore and fables. Where did the mermaid originate?
Um, there's no definite answer to that, because when humans started living near bodies of water, whether it was salt water or sweet water, there are reports of merfolk, or mer creatures, sea creatures who resemble humans, both in salt water and sweet water, and we have legends from Japanese lore. We have legends from Indian history. So all these, the Arabs, of course, who being great seamen and navigators, have their tales of the. In Karachi, when I was studying at college, I heard a very interesting tale about mermaids that the local fishermen catch, and they, of course, uh, do strange things to them. They think it's a actual female. So there are stories even in our present time uh, about these creatures. So these have continued.
So, just to clarify, your book is a retelling of a, a bunch of stories, or is it one story, or how would you describe it?
How do you describe it? Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it, but in terms of the history, I'm asking because you said it's borrowed from history and historical facts. Uh,
Yes.
how would you sort of?
A lot of small episodes that constitute the story uh, are some are designed for this book. Some have been copied verbatim from different historical texts from Ajab al-Makhluqat of Qazvini. But the outer frame story that I've created, and the legend of the merman, it started with just a 3-line mention, which I read in a book about a merman who was presented to a king, and the king asked him, asked about what this merman is talking about, and he has an experiment where the merman is married a human uh, to a human being, and they have a child. And the king's logic was that being married to a woman, their child, if they have a child, would be able to understand the language of both mother and father, which is,
Okay.
makes good sense. And then he'd be able to ask the child what his father was saying, and the the child was asked that question at the successful completion of this experiment in the book. And the child just said that my father says all animals have tails in their back, but the humans have tail growing out of their chin. So they thought the human beard was the human tail that
Okay,
fit.
that's interesting.
So that
So,
was
yeah,
the anecdote,
yeah.
which by the way is mentioned in Najab al Makhluqat.
Okay. That's good to know. And coming also to the same point, do you think that there's more power in retelling a story or in an untold story?
It really depends what you're trying to do. I was trying to create the format of a qissa. Now, qissas, there are two kinds. One is a straightforward story in which there is nothing, no digression into another story, but there are other kinds of qissas in which one story leads to another, like a frame story, like the Arabian Nights, like some of the uh, tales from Indian literature, Betal Pachisi, Vikram and the Vampire. So these stories have a function that all constituent stories or all interior stories should work together. So the whole purpose in writing this was to replicate that form, that old form of writing stories, the form of a qissa, in which there are many small stories which work together to create a wholesome effect. So that was the goal.
Mhm. So coming to the structure now, because you mentioned the compilation and all, I noticed that your book does not contain any dialogue. So it's just descriptions and describing actions, and that was how kissas or dastans were formulated back in the day. So was it difficult for you to write like that without dialogues, without expression, but just a straightforward narrative?
I don't particularly like dialogue, so
Okay.
even in Between Clay and Dust, other novel, which is more realistic novel, is very few dialogue unless it's really necessary. And the problem, well, in this form, dialogues are not written, but in a modern novel, because I'm writing in English about a world which exists in a non-English language, whether it's Punjabi or Urdu or something else. Uh, the English dialogue has to mimic the intonation, the idiom, the life of the Urdu or Punjabi or Sindhi or Pashto dialogue. If they don't do that, if they become an American English or a British English dialogue while describing the current world,
Mhm.
um, I think it fails to communicate the life it's trying to capture. So that's my thing. Uh, in novels where I have used dialogue, I'm very conscious of the life of the dialogue, how it interacts with the actual society it's trying to depict.
Now, I believe it's time that we dive into the novel. So this is what Musharraf's book looks like. Beautiful artwork here, and then here there's a merman here. who's also one of the central characters. And there's a mermaid here, and there's beautiful illustrations inside the book as well, and different characters. It's really beautifully written. And you launched your book with LLF in last spring as well, and then Usman Tanveer Malik said something really wonderful. He said that because your writing is so intricate and so well researched and so potent and profound, it's almost like you're telling a story, but it's like a miniature.
He's very kind. Um, I try to condense a lot of stuff
Mm.
because as somebody who works in education and has done a lot of storytelling for kids and received their responses, I feel that if we are able to activate our audiences or our readers' imagination, they can fill out a lot of the details. Sometimes you don't have to write 5 pages to put them in a particular place or a particular mood for that matter. Just a few brief uh, lines, sentences suffice to do the work. So
But
I try to, sorry, yes.
But having said that, with all the illustrations and the pictures and the colorful cover and all, I would also say that it's a book for adults and not for children, right?
That's
Definitely.
correct. It's not at all for
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of people may confuse you because you stay also write for children. So this is not really a children's book.
It did
Um,
happen. I was in Karachi at a school, and uh, I was going to introduce them my children's novel Tick Tick the Master of Time,
mhm,
and they all went to Liberty Books in Karachi. They didn't have Tick Tick the Master of Time, so they looked around and found Between Clay and Dust. So the next they and many of them bought it. So the next morning when I visited class 3, they were all sitting with Between Clay and Dust and reading, and I think they were reading fine.
that's good to hear. As long as they're reading, that's what's important, right?
Hmm.
So let's get into the characters a little bit about the book. I think we sort of have covered a lot about the genre and the kissa and the style of the narrative. There's so Kazvini, the scholar and the main person. Everything is everything is told from the point of view of his thought and his aspirations and his anxiety. And I'll get to that a bit more, but can you talk a bit more about um, writing from Kazvini's perspective, or if it actually is written from Kazvini's perspective? It's not only me imagining it.
Um, well, there are passages which are told from his perspective. There are other passages which are independent stories. Of course, he's the protagonist of his narrative. Um, it was not easy. Uh, one of the things that you have to do when you're writing historical fiction, which it is historical fantasy, is to try to construct one character who could whom you could understand in that particular time, in that particular milieu, in that particular period or circumstances. Uh, and if you could understand one person really well, that person's motivations, what are his or her dreams, and what drives him or her, I think it becomes easier to uh, weave the world around them. So um, I did read about Qazvini's own history. Where did he originate? Which was from a place called Wasit. It was a marshland known for its very ferocious mosquitoes. So all these are interesting details for to develop a character. That he comes from a place and he said mosquitoes. So suddenly you understand a character. Yeah. with a little more immediacy that okay, yes, okay.
Because a lot of the how the characters are described, it does come across as Kazvini is describing them. For example, with Gujastak, if I'm pronouncing it right, he's the merman that everyone is. He's that magical creature that appeared out of somewhere, and then everyone's examining him and trying to create more mermaids and all. But um, I often feel that there's this tension between Gujaskat and Kazvini, and Kazvini almost feels threatened by him, fascinated, but also threatened by him. Do you feel like it's his freedom for a lot of things, and because he's not tamed, and humans are so humanized? So, do you feel like Kazvini is scared? At the same time fascinated by him, and there's that whole concept of toxic masculinity going on in the same place.
Yes, of course, because the merman is not bound by any code of any kind, which Kazvini must observe, also because of his position as a senior bureaucrat in Laku Khan's Gamut of all things, and also because of, the who he is, a scholar, a religious, a judge, a qazi. So and they both desire the same woman, and he is also frightened by her ferociousness, her wild nature, and so does. But the same things appeal to Gujastak, the merman, because he immediately finds a bond with that free creature who's is freed of all kind of inhibitions and basic social codes.
And it's also pretty evident in the way you're describing this creature, per se, Eden or Idan. How would you pronounce her name?
Sorry.
How would you pronounce her name? Idan or Eden, the creature that you're describing? The lady. Everyone is she's
Yes.
so sought after.
It's
So
with a soft D, Eden.
Eden. Okay. So she particularly stands out, even though she might not be one of the central characters. She's a peripheral character, but she definitely stands out. And the reason why she stood out for me was because of the way she was described, free of inhibitions and no moral compass. But um, it also ties in very well with the toxic masculinity, that neither of them could have it. So if they can't have her, then she's just no one, and she's at the end of the day she's no one. So it was something that stood out significantly for me. Then now times have changed, but even though this is a modern day novel, why is Eden written about like that?
Um, because even though we may think that a person is free of all inhibitions and free of all rules by which we judge appropriate behavior, um, it does not always mean that a person is a person does not have their own um, strong moral compass. So, for instance, um, once she was once she escaped, um, she why did she stay with Gujastak? Because she was loyal, and so there are things which are
Have to
uh,
be read. You have to read the book to find out.
one
That
of
is
yeah,
true.
one of the very important things. You have to read the book and
But
get it. Uh,
overall, she is sort of narrated from a male gaze, so for the male gaze, as a spectacle. Right? Initially, that's, I mean, how she's described.
um, that may uh, that may be, yes. I will not I will not contest that.
Okay. So those are all the questions from me. Let's look at we have about, I think, one question from the audience. And they say, do you find it more freeing to write for children versus for adults? Recently, I heard Matt Haig, the Midnight Library, state that it's somewhat easier to let your imagination flow when writing for children because not everything needs to be explained makes sense. Do you find that to be true?
It's not easy writing for children, and when you're writing for kids, you don't have to. You cannot. I mean, nothing is stopping you to let your imagination run free when you're writing for adults, but especially for kids, everything has to have a cause and effect. A lot of the time, if you write something for adult readers, out of politeness, they may say that, oh yes, well, it's very interesting. But a child will not do that. They will tell you that, maza nahi aaya, or it was garbage, or whatever, which is a great uh, way to, you know, to be judged and to receive um, your feedback from your readers. So it's not easy to write for kids. One has to be really, really careful how a story is told, how it's structured, and of course that it should be of should be fun and of benefit to kids. Very easy to make people cry, difficult to make people laugh.
You think so? Is it difficult to make people laugh?
Yes, uh, I think so.
Would you ever write another? Have you ever thought of experimenting with sort of a funny narrative or anything, short story, or for children
There,
and
yeah, there is Rabbit Trap, which is for young adults and also adults who are a little crazy, might enjoy it. Most of the time, they like to have very serious literature
yeah,
to feel
uh,
important. That they are not wasting their time.
and they're relevant.
Hmm.
Um, so I think that was the last question from the audience. I think should wrap it up, but I do have one last question. Do you have any thing else coming up, a kissa? And do we have to wait 5 years for that?
No, no, no. This will be quicker. I was working on other things while I was writing it. Yes, another qissa is coming out. It should be out next year, and it is uh, based in Lahore.
In Lahore, and it's historical
It is
fiction,
historical. Yes, it
fantasy,
is historical. But again, uh, everything based on facts.
based on.
Fun fact.
All right, all right, all right. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for
Thank you.
enlightening all of
And
us, enlightening me, enlightening everyone who's watching. Thanks to everyone who is watching. Musharraf's new book, The Merman and the Book of Power. Musharraf, can you tell
available
everyone
from
where they can,
it's available from Daraz, and that's the only outlet that we have for this book. Yes.
for currently, you can get it from theraz.pk, order it online, and you can get it from there then. All right. Thank you, Musharraf,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for everyone who's watching. We have more talks coming up next week, so stay tuned on our Facebook page. And okay, bye.
Bye.